Thank you. Thank you all for joining me for this last-minute conversation about Easter and Passover and the politics of America. And thank you, all of you who are with us on live stream. In A Course in Miracles, it says that when an idea is shared, it grows stronger. And that's one of the reasons why Passover and Easter are so powerful. On this day, all over the world, people are sharing the thought of the power of love. Just sharing that thought. And that's what makes holidays holy. It's where our minds go. You know, so often when it comes to religion, we think in terms of dogma, we think in terms of doctrine. But the spiritual revolution on the planet today, and there is a spiritual revolution, is a revolution of consciousness, as we all know. It's not about doctrine, it's not about dogma, but it is about where the human mind goes. And politics has everything to do with where the mind goes, because thought precedes behavior. And so I want to talk tonight about the politics of our country, how I see them in terms of my presidential campaign, and what role a deeper understanding of the serious spiritual nuggets of truth at the core of all religions have to do with this. You know, one of the things that Judaism and Islam have in common that is different than Christianity is that in both Islam and Judaism, the theology, the issue of one's relationship to God, is tied up and intricately bound with the history of a people. That's different in Christianity. In Christianity, it is very much about one's personal relationship to God, but not necessarily in terms of the historical narrative of a particular group of people. But we're living at a time now where no matter what your religious or even spiritual orientation, the issue of history of people is certainly extremely significant, because we're at the beginning, and not even so much at the beginning anymore. It's now, it's 2019. I mean, we're here, we're into this century now, and we're talking about an evolutionary trajectory moving forward in which something historic is going on, in that it is not a given that we will survive the century. It is not a given that we will survive the century, not because anything outside of us is a problem, but because we're a problem. I mean, everything that could actually reasonably be considered a possibility of global catastrophe is only there because we might be so insane to cause it. We might be so insane to behave so recklessly in terms of our behavior towards the earth, or we might be so insane that we would be so reckless towards our behavior with each other. So whether it has to do with climate crisis or nuclear weaponry or anything like that, we stand at a crossroads as a human race. And one road leads towards consequences of whatever craziness we come up with, and the other path leads to another option. In A Course in Miracles, it says salvation begins when we consider the possibility that there might be another way. Now, our lives individually transform when we consider the possibility that there might be another way. And one of the reasons I'm running for president, and in a way, a core description of why I'm running for president, is because I believe that we need, as a nation, to consider the possibility that there might be another way. So here on this day, when we are already joined with billions of people around the world who are considering a love that is not of this world, in the space of which all things are possible, I want to talk about that very concept in terms of American politics. First of all, starting from the very founding of this country, doing the impossible has been what we do in this country. The U.S. Constitution, it was like impossible. It was like how were these little colonies going to come up with something that was going to be so earth-shattering and posit such an amazing possibility of individual freedom on this planet? How is that possible that that happened? How is it possible that we had then abolished slavery? How is it possible that women gained the right to vote? How is it possible that we desegregated the American South and ended segregation and white supremacy in the American South? From the beginning, let's be very, very clear, from the beginning of this country has represented both the highest aspirations of humanity as well as the lowest, most base instincts. We had, on one hand, a Declaration of Independence where people who signed the Declaration of Independence were risking their lives in order to do so. And they were positing the most enlightened principles that had ever infused the founding of a nation, that all men are created equal, that God gave all men inalienable rights of life and of liberty and the pursuit of happiness, and that governments were instituted among men in order to secure those rights. But 41 of those men who signed that declaration were themselves slave owners. So we have always been this dichotomy. This is our historical narrative. And this historical narrative has repeated it every single generation, ours no less than any other. And it's this dichotomy, it's this polarity between the fact that there have always been, and there are today, people whose hearts are ablaze with the radicalism of the very concept that everybody should have an opportunity to self-actualize. Everybody. That everybody should have an opportunity, that the shackles should be removed, and that everybody should be able to soar according to their own efforts. And that our task is to create a society in which, to the best of our ability, that's possible. And that's not just something that means you and I have the rights to that. It's something which means that you and I have the responsibility to take very good care of that, and to foster it and nurture it in our generation in order to bequeath it to others. What happens too often, though, and it's happened in this generation, is that we seem to have taken it for granted that once established as a democracy, okay, that's cool, we got that. No, we don't got that, because in every generation, there are those whose hearts are not ablaze with it, who actually find the very notion of real democracy and freedom and justice for all inconvenient to their purposes, usually inconvenient to their economic purposes. And that is as true today as it has ever been. So what happens is that every generation decides for itself. Every generation makes a decision through our collective behavior. What are you going to stand for? What's going to be the chapter that you write in this continuing historical narrative? Generations wrote slavery. Generation rose up and wrote abolition. Generations wrote suppression of women. Generations rose up and wrote two major waves of feminism and the women's suffragette movement. Generations wrote institutionalized white supremacy and segregation. Generation rose up with the civil rights movement. You and I are now standing in one of those times. But we're not standing at a time where those forces which mitigate against the possibility of self-actualization for all people takes a particular institutional form so much it is that it is diffused by an economic mindset. Now, this is so you really have to figure it out what's going on. Because if you have a particular institutional form, it's like an operable tumor. Well, they won't let women vote, so we just need to pass the 19th Amendment. We need to pass an amendment. Or they have slaves, we just need to abolish slavery. Now, none of that was easy, but you could see what the problem was, and you had to excise it. This is now an entire mindset that promulgates itself as good for business. And it has been proffered for 40 years in this country through billions of dollars that have been spent on candidates and on propaganda and all manner of effort to basically take the major resources of our country and to move them into the hands of a very few people. Now, why does this matter spiritually? It matters spiritually in a very, very deep way, because the very idea of evolving to the idea of democracy where all men get to soar, all men get to self-actualize, that was not just a political movement forward for humanity. The reason it was so earth-shattering in terms of what it offered to the planet and the changes that it brought about on the planet and in human history was because it was something new from a moral perspective, from a spiritual perspective. You mean everybody? You mean it doesn't matter who they are? You mean it doesn't matter what their religion? You mean it doesn't matter what their class? You mean it doesn't matter who their parents were? Everybody? Yep, everybody. And God said it? Yep, God said it. That was radical in 1776, and it's radical today. But what's happened now is that an economic mindset has so infused the workings of our government that for all intents and purposes, our government advocates for the economic good of a very few people as opposed to the real fruits and the real opportunities that a free society can present. And what that means is that fewer people can soar. It means that fewer people can self-actualize. It means that fewer people can spread their wings. When you have 40% of the American people who live as they live today, 40% of the American people have a struggle on a daily basis, just making ends meet in terms of health and food and transportation and rent. What does this do to you as a person? It keeps you in constant anxiety. It keeps you in constant like this. Who can soar? Who can soar? And the greatness and the promise of democracy is that there is enough opportunity, that there is enough sharing and universal applicability of opportunity that anybody can become who God created them to be. Now, when slavery existed in this country, it would have been considered a miracle to abolish it. And it was a religious and spiritual movement that led to abolition. It was the early evangelicals in this country and the Quakers. Abolition emerged from a spiritual basis. It wasn't just people who thought, I don't think politically that's a very good idea. That's not where abolition came from. Abolition came from enough people saying, that's wrong. It was a moral statement. It was a moral commitment. That's wrong. And same with the women's suffragette movement. Many of the women who were the leaders in the suffragette movement were Quakers. They weren't just coming from, we want the right. It was like, it's wrong to hold women down. It's against the whole idea of the equality of souls, that God gave all men. If God gave all men inalienable rights, the whole aspirational narrative of this country is that should mean all men, meaning all women too, meaning people no matter what their color, meaning no matter what, meaning all souls. And same with the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was begun and led by a Baptist preacher. Dr. King was coming from a religious base. It wasn't just politically, it's not democracy. It's that morally and spiritually it's wrong. And that is how we are going to disrupt something very wrong today. Because we realize that it's not just, I don't think it should be that way. It's that it's wrong. You have millions of American children who go to school every single day in schools that don't even have the adequate school supplies with which to teach an 8-year-old to read. And if an 8-year-old cannot read, the chances of high school graduation is drastically diminished and the chances of incarceration is drastically increased. We should see this as a humanitarian crisis and emergency in our midst. These children are trapped. And the view of the political establishment basically is to normalize their despair. They're not old enough to vote, so they don't have a form of constituency. They're not old enough to work, so they don't have any financial leverage. And what has happened is that this economic system, which basically serves, and this is done through policies, this is what tax policies do and corporate subsidies do, bank deregulation and so forth. What happens is that this way that this only a small group of people have the financial resources with which to truly operationalize their dreams and actualize their highest hopes on the earth is at the expense of so many other people, including the millions of these American children. Now, this country was supposed to be in the hands of you and me. It's supposed to be in the hands of we the people. This country is not supposed to be run by the will of health insurance companies, big pharma, gun manufacturers, fossil fuel companies, big agricultural chemical companies, and defense contractors. It's supposed to be you and me. And so you and I have the same task that other generations before us have had, which is, are we going to stand for this or not? Are we going to claim in our time our capacity to do what needs to be done to set this country back on track? Because these children are trapped. This is a ticking time bomb. We already have 2.3 million people in prison in this country. When I was in college, there were 300,000. What's going to happen to these children? Where do you think this opioid crisis is coming from? Except the fact that so many people just find the pain of living too great. At what point are we going to realize some things have gone wrong here on some really, really deep levels? And in order to change this, we are going to have to dig deep, deep down into those deeper oceanic forces where miracles come from if we are going to change this. And that's why I wanted to have this talk on Easter. You know, on Passover, the whole idea is that the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt, and Moses was sent by God to rescue them and to deliver them to the promised land. That's why Martin Luther King, when he would talk about race in America, my people will reach the promised land. His conceptualization was biblical, to reach the promised land. And of course, the whole idea of bondage in Egypt, we all have our own personal Egypts, and it could be individual bondage, the bondage of addiction, the bondage of heartbreak, the bondage of whatever our personal stuff is, or it could be external forms of bondage. But the point of Passover is to take it deep into our minds, the realization that it is already written that no matter what the form of bondage, God sends the Moses, and that could be a Moses, an internal Moses, or an actual person of Moses. And the story of Easter, whether you think of that personage as Jesus or not. Some people do, some people don't. But the idea of the resurrection of Jesus is the idea that the deadened places within ourselves can yet come back to life. Now, this is very significant right now because it is very easy in America today to feel hopeless. It is very easy to look at the economic system that I mentioned already and just think, you know, it's just sewn up. And so many people are feeling such despair and such anxiety and such hopelessness, and that can lead us into some very weakened places. It can lead us to cynicism. Cynicism is just an excuse for not helping. It can lead us to just whining, which is absolutely not an option. It is our turn to stand up as other generations have stood up before us. We are not the first generation to be confronted with genuinely anti-democratic forces. Let's just not be the first generation to wimp out on doing what it takes to get this country back on track. At the deepest level, it's a spiritual contest. Because there is love, and then there's the aspect of mind that is not love. The aspect of mind that is not love is fear. And fear takes externalized forms: misogyny, racism, bigotry, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, xenophobia. That we have seen in our time what hate can do. If you look at a terrorist organization, it is hate operationalized, hate externalized. The only way to override this is for us to operationalize and externalize love. That is what the abolitionist movement was. It was love externalized and operationalized. That's what the women's suffragette movement was. It was love operationalized and strategized and externalized. That's what the civil rights movement, it was love operationalized, externalized, and strategized. You know, a lot of times people have been talking about things like small random acts of kindness. Small random acts of kindness are not enough. We need huge strategized acts of doing the right thing. This is why Martin Luther King said about Gandhi that Gandhi was the first person in human history to take the love ethic of Jesus and to turn it into a broad-scale social force for good. Now, to Gandhi, it was not just the love ethic of Jesus. To Gandhi, it was the love ethic at the heart of all the great religious systems in the world. But the issue is for us to realize, as Gandhi said, that love does not just apply to your relationship with me or your relationship to me. It applies to relationships among people. We have to think of not only love for our children, we have to think of the love that we need to have in order to live meaningful lives and to really rise to the occasion of those millions of American children who are trapped in those positions of chronic trauma. Do you know that those children, that psychologists say that the PTSD of the returning veteran from Afghanistan or Iraq is no more severe than the PTSD of these children. And they're in every major state, in every city. We have in this country, ladies and gentlemen, we have elementary school students on suicide watch. We have children in this country who are traumatized by the time they reach pre-K. So great is the violence in their homes, in their communities, even in their schools. And we're all just kind of like, well, like there's nothing we can do. No, there's a lot we can do. But the term inertia means the tendency of the object to move in whatever direction it's been moving until there's a direction of a counterforce. And the way things are moving, we're moving away from a democracy. We're moving in an aristocratic direction. Aristocracy is when the real opportunities belong to only a few people. Now, in America today, if a child won the birth lottery in terms of financial advantage of their parents, then a child is very likely to have a very fine public education in America. But America is the only advanced nation that bases our educational funding primarily on property taxes. So that means that you have these millions of children and they're just trapped. We have schools in America that don't have libraries. And we just keep withholding arts education. If you want to see the economic abundance of this country, you want to see the potential of this country, you go to any kindergarten, anywhere in this city or anywhere in this country. The brain, this is what's going to take us into the 21st century. The development of the human brain, particularly in early childhood, and the development of our capacity to love one another. Easter is a day in which we consider, we can do this. There is a power in us, but not of us. Because we can look at everything that you and I were just talking about, everything that I mentioned, and it's heavy to feel it. That's the meaning of crucifixion. That's the meaning of bondage in Egypt, is all of those conditions, material conditions, which just mitigate against love. How is it that in a world where we're supposed to love each other, how is it that in a country where it's supposed to be inalienable rights to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, these children are full-on citizens of the United States? There are millions of these children. Where's their pursuit of happiness? And yet everybody, you can feel it in this room. We're all like, it's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. Well, no, it's not the way it is. Or at least it's not the way it is and will continue as it is unless we don't respond. So whether you call it slavery in Egypt or whether you call it the cross, whether you call it crucifixion, those externalized circumstances that mitigate against love, and we have many of them. We have those children. We have 41 million people in America who are hungry. We have mass incarceration. We have racial disparity in criminal sentencing. We have the fact that we spend so little in terms of resources that are actually leading towards those things that wage peace in the world, expanding economic opportunities for women, expanding educational opportunities for children, and reducing violence against women, ameliorating unnecessary human suffering wherever it exists, wherever possible. That's how you wage peace. But that we put a very little resource and little money to that compared to the money we spend on preparing for war. Not because the military has even necessarily asked for equipment, so much as because we are fulfilling the needs of short-term profits of defense contractors rather than the real needs of peace. Where are we going to be with this? That's the question. Where are we going to be with this? And on Easter, and on Passover, this is so powerful. On Easter, the whole point is that there is a light in us. There is a love in us that casts out darkness, that breaks the spell. That's what's really powerful about Easter. That's what's really powerful, whether you consider yourself a Christian or not. The idea that there is an aspect of consciousness, whether you relate to it as Jesus or not, breaks the spell. Slavery was a spell. It was a spell that was cast. Misogyny was a spell that was cast. White supremacy was a spell that was cast. And there's a spell being cast in America today. There's a spell that is being cast in America today. And people, that's why I always say, people who think it's just what we got to do is find somebody, tough enough to beat Donald Trump, is very naive about the nature of the opponent. Something really deep's going on here. Something really deep is going on here. Primal aspects of fear had been harnessed for political purposes. The only way you can defeat those dog whistles, ladies and gentlemen, and let's not kid ourselves, there are dog whistles going on with this stuff. And let's not kid ourselves either. When you were attacking the press, when you were demeaning your political opponents, when you were calling even for them to be jailed, when you were showing complete disregard for constitutional liberties, that's leaning towards fascism. This is not a time for us to go, well, nothing we can do, or get all cynical, or just get all whiny about it. No. This is serious stuff, and this is our time. And the reason religion and spirituality have such a part to play is because you know that the only way to defeat dog whistles is to override them by drowning them out with angel voices. But angels can only sing through us. When Abraham Lincoln talked about the angels of our better nature, I don't think he thought he was being metaphorical, because he was talking before the advent of modern psychotherapy. So if it was 200 years ago and somebody was talking about what we would today refer to as racism, bigotry, anti-Semitism, homophobia, Islamophobia, you know what they would have said 200 years ago? Oh, yeah, demons. And if you said to them, and then there's justice and brotherhood and tolerance and compassion and forgiveness and love, you know what the people would have said 200 years ago? Oh, angels. And it's interesting because we thought we were so sophisticated that we evolved beyond all that. I think now people are thinking maybe that was more sophisticated. These are actual dimensions of consciousness. And when you take those demonic thoughts, that's what racism is. That's what bigotry is. This is serious. When you see people walking through, marching through Charlottesville, Jews shall not replace us. When you see Nazis, when you see slave owners, this is the stuff of serious human consequence. And we need now to hold love as serious human consequence. And that's what Easter is about. Easter's not namby-pamby. And I've never heard a Jew say, I'm not going to go to Passover this year because I know the story. I've never heard a Christian say, I'm not going to go to Easter service today because I know the story. We all know the story. The issue is what happens when we realize, oh, I get it. My divorce was my crucifixion. My cancer diagnosis was my crucifixion. My addiction was my crucifixion. And I claim resurrection. I claim that I will emerge from the dead. Now we need to do that as a nation, that we get these forces that have been collectivized. Yes, they are among us. No point in pretending they're not among us. But you know, you don't transcend darkness by pretending it's not there. That's not transcendence. That's denial. So we have to face what's going on. There is a collective crucifixion going on in this country right now. It is a collective crucifixion, these millions of American children. It is a collective crucifixion that we are not really planning to wage peace. We are just figuring out all the wars, the ways that we can possibly fight wars appropriately. The bigotry and the racism and the misogyny and the Islamophobia and the anti-Semitism, these things are taking collective shape. They are not just ideas. They are taking political form. They have taken political form before, and they are taking political form today. The issue is, are we going to give political form and externalized and strategized form to the love that breaks that spell? And to think about this on this day. Those who hate in America, and I believe this very strongly about this country, and I believe this very strongly about the world, far more people love than hate. And here in this country, we're a good and a decent people. That's not in my mind the problem at all. But those who hate with conviction. And there's some serious dog whistles going out there from the haters. And some of the haters and the most mean-spirited and bigoted people of all are in some very high places. What are we going to do? And do you think that this can be fixed just through, well, we're going to win an election? This goes so much deeper than that. And we have to go deep. We have to go deep. We have to realize the problem goes that deep, and we need to realize that the answer goes that deep. And that's what generations before us have done. The civil rights movement was based in a religious and a spiritual movement. Abolition originally came from a spiritual and a religious movement. And this has been throughout our country. When we have really emerged into something beautiful and good, it is because we've emerged from something deep within ourselves. Now, I want to talk for a moment about the separation of church and state. The separation of church and state is one of the most enlightened aspects of our country. That's a very good thing. Separation of church and state. When we were kids and we would learn about how people came over here for religious freedom, it's a big deal. Even today on the planet, look what happened. Tragedy in Sri Lanka today. People being bombed, people being killed because of their religion. So in this country, the idea of religious plurality, the fact that anybody can be any religion they want or no religion they want, is an important aspect of our society and of our freedoms. And separation of church and state has a dual function. On one hand, it protects the government from interference by religious clergy. So you're never going to see a picture of Congress and some minister, priest, rabbi, mufti, imam, ayatollah, monk come into Congress and say, you can't pass this law or you have to pass that law. That happens in countries like Iran, for instance, where the ayatollahs can do that. That's not going to happen here. But it also is true, you could have in America a church, you could have a synagogue, you could have a mosque, you could have a Wicca meeting, you could have a young atheists meeting, you could have a AA meeting, you could have a Hindu meeting, you could have a Buddhist meeting, and no policeman is going to come in and say, break it up. That's like so huge. That's huge. That's not going to happen here. And that's what separation of church and state does, that it protects the functioning of our government from interference by religious clergy, and it protects any kind of religious or non-religious practice from interference by government. But the founders were not seeking to suppress the religious conversation. They were seeking to liberate it and protect it. So it is important that we have a conversation about the things we're talking about today within the political reality of our time. Because if you face Easter or Passover and you say, yeah, it's dinner, it's lunch, I'm going to take my mother to lunch and, it's nice, I got some flowers, a lot of bunnies, saw little bunnies, then we're just dealing on this superficial level. These spiritual forces at the heart of all the great religious traditions, they're serious stuff. We have some serious problems in this country. And it's time for us to dig into some very serious and deep waters within ourselves in order to deal with them. And I want to talk to my dearly beloved companions here in New York who go to places like this where we are today. There are a lot of people in America who like to think that we're disrupting the system. And I submit to you that in order to disrupt the system, we're going to have to do a whole lot more than we might think. That this is a time it's not just cosmetic, it's not just aesthetic, it's not even just building community, because you can't skip over the crucifixion and go right to the resurrection. We need to be very politically savvy right now. This is at one of those moments in our history. Americans don't like to always be about politics. That's why our founders moved our capital from New York to Washington. That's very interesting. If you go to a country like Germany or England or France, the cultural and the political capitals are in the same city. And that's very healthy because the coolest people are having dinner all the time with the political leaders. So you kind of come up with hipper governments because the people who are running the government are around the artists and the cool cultural people all the time. Our founders, however, wanted to separate the government, and it was understandable for the time because they didn't want government in your face. But what it has done, it's created a separation which makes it too easy for people who are doing all the fabulous artistic stuff over here to not really have to deal with that, and too easy for the people who are running the government to not be exposed to this. One of the things I spent a lot of time in my life in Los Angeles, and it's very cool in some places. It's considered like okay to just put down Los Angeles all the time. But the truth of the matter is some of the most creative things in the world are happening in Los Angeles. And I was saying in one interview the other day, there are people in the entertainment industry in America, in movies and in television, who are doing more to get real about what's happening in politics, particularly in something like race in America, than they're doing in Washington. But we also have to bring it to Washington. But I know for myself, as someone who's running for president, I'm not wanting to leave a career which is all about the depths to go into shallow waters. No, 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 no. Our job is to take the depths of who and what we are and the depths of our consideration into what's happening in our country. The Catholics, they actually celebrate, they actually mark Good Friday as well as Easter. Good Friday is a fascinating concept. That's the day of the crucifixion. There's something about noting, just like when a Jew at Passover, you have to read about the slavery in Egypt. You can't just go into the march to the journey to the promised land. You recognize what slavery in Egypt was. And the same with the crucifixion and the resurrection. If you can't just jump over the crucifixion and go right to resurrection, like I said, then you're not in transcendence, you're in denial. That's why I said our just building community and all being loving and stuff, we got to note it. We got to note what's happening to those children. We've got to note what's happening with mass incarceration. We've got to note what's happening with racial disparity. We've got to note what's happening with the fact that we are on this crazy, insane war-making path, but we're not doing what we need to do to wage peace. I mean, that's why I talk about a Department of Children and Youth. That's why I talk about a U.S. Department of Peace. We must promulgate love, just like some promulgate fear. And so I'm very grateful that we have this opportunity today to think about political things. You know, I remember when people would say to me, I say this all the time, when people would say, oh, we're not going to talk about politics or religion. And I'm so like, that leaves me out at dinner. And Gandhi, I read a quote from Gandhi once where he said, anybody who doesn't think religion has anything to do with politics doesn't understand religion. There's no religious or spiritual path that gives any of us a pass on addressing the suffering of other sentient beings. So none of this spiritual stuff while just conveniently avoiding what is happening on this planet, what we're doing to the planet. That we have 12 years to stand up and save this planet in the midst of this climate crisis, and we still have billions of dollars spent by fossil fuel companies to obstruct those efforts. Those efforts have always been wrong, and they're wrong now. And we have a government that has been there's been so much moral equivocation about this. We need to break the spell. So today is such a beautiful day to think about these things. You don't just think about the resurrection. You take to God the realization of all that is not love. You know, sometimes I will look at a baby, and a baby just being loved by mommy, daddy, friends, and you realize how beautiful it could all be. The glee of a child, or sometimes when we fall in love, or we're just having good times with friends. This is what the world could be. But as Gandhi said, the problem with the world is that humanity is not in its right mind. What is it with war? What is it with unnecessary human suffering and poverty and 12,000 children dying every day of starvation and 41 million Americans in America who are food insecure, and millions of American children going to school every day, food insecure, getting their food from food banks, and the food banks concerned when I go visit them and they say, well, what kind of work? Because we give the kids lunch, you know, we give them a box of food on Friday, but we don't know if somebody else might eat it, so we're not sure they'll have enough to eat by Monday. This is in America, in the richest country in the world. And it's time for all of us to wake up and to realize that the way it is now, it's not going to change if we don't change it. But it's also not going to change if we just show up to vote every 2 years, every 4 years. Something deep in that's got to happen. And so I'd like you to join with me, because this is the day. This is what Easter should be. You know, there's a part in the Course in Miracles where it says, if you've been in a dungeon for a very long time, let's say you've been in a dungeon for years, and then all of a sudden you're let out of the dungeon, and you feel the sun on your skin for the first time in years, or you feel the breeze on your skin for the first time in years, and you can actually see the grass and the trees and the flowers for the first time in years. The Course says you probably wouldn't jump up and down for joy immediately. It would be like, wow. And that, I think, is how we should be on Easter. It's joy, but I think it was Werner Erhard who said, the truth shall set you free, but not immediately. First, it will piss you off. The truth is that love casts out fear. The truth is that in the space of love, we can have anything. The truth is this extraordinary reality where, because we are citizens of the most powerful nation in the world, because we are citizens of a country in which, despite it all, our democracy is not dead yet, but it's our turn. It's our turn to rise up. If we really take deep down into our hearts what a serious moment this is, we don't go into joy immediately. So I ask you to join with me, both in a realization of how deep the problems are, as well as considering the possibility that there might be another way, and considering the possibility, which is an absolute reality. That's the meaning of Passover. That's the meaning of Easter. That's why it says in the Course in Miracles that in the presence of love, miracles occur naturally. I was reading a quote today from James Madison, who authored the US Constitution, and he referred to the Constitution as a miracle. We shouldn't apologize for the fact. Other generations didn't apologize for the realization that much of what has happened in this country was miraculous. And we shouldn't think we're so cool that we won't admit that that's what we're going for too. So I think it would be very cool if we close our eyes and allow ourselves to bear witness to the great narrative of American history, to bear witness with depth and appreciation all the great souls who have brought forth light in the midst of darkness, who have worked miracles in their time and risen to the occasion when the occasion was painful and perilous. And today, although our outer eye is closed, our inner eye is open, and we bear witness to the agony of our time. We bear witness to the chronic economic pain and despair of millions. We bear witness to the pain and the suffering of billions of people living in such deep poverty that thousands will starve on any day. We bear witness to those who are unfairly imprisoned and even tortured in certain places of the world. We bear witness to the pain of animals. We bear witness to the unnecessary and insane mistreatment of our earth. We bear witness to the desecration of righteous and healthy agriculture. We bear witness to all the ways in which human suffering is turned into a profit center through imprisonment, through unrighteous commerce, through war making that need not be. We bear witness to injustice. We bear witness to those who experience in their lives the consequences of racism, of bigotry, of Islamophobia, of anti-Semitism, of misogyny, of xenophobia. We bear witness to those who suffer at the border. We bear witness to unfair and even cruel immigration policies. We do not look away. We bear witness to the agony of others. We bear witness. But we shall not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. We shall do justly, we shall love mercy, we shall walk humbly. And we dedicate our lives on this day, all that we have and all that we are, that love might use us. As love has used and worked through great souls throughout time. People just like us, imperfect just like us, and yet willing to actualize the greatness of God within them. And now we pray that love use us, that love cast a new spell, the spell of a new dawn and a new morning. And we claim the power of Easter. We claim and embrace the power of a love that is greater than death itself. The love that brings all dead to new life. A love that works miracles. A love that overrides fear. A peace that casts out pain. We consider in this moment what love can do. On this Easter Sunday, we consider a love that shall be a peace so great as to cast out war. A dedication to our planet so great that the earth shall be cleansed, the skies shall be cleansed, and the waters shall be cleansed. A love so great that all hungry shall be fed. The weak shall be made strong, the sick shall be healed. A love so great that all systems of government, all systems of human interaction shall be turned from injustice to justice, from meanness to compassion. And all beings shall yet be free. And now on this day of such great power, where billions of people are considering the infinite power of love, let those of us here now speak our word. And if and when any of us now feel moved to use the power of our word to affirm, I see an America, or I see a world in which, and to speak your word for that which is good, that which is love, that which is peace, in whatever form as applied to any situation or circumstance, I see an America in which, or I see a world in which. When you feel so moved to speak, please do. If someone else is speaking, please hold back, that all can be heard. I see. Rise up within yourself and speak your word. I see a world in which all children are safe, nourished, loved.
A world where we change from me first to we first.
I see a world that operates in permanent magical culture where our highest calling can be actualized, and that we are a world of beauty and interaction and enchantment and love.
I see a world where everyone isn't so obsessed with money.
I see a world in see a world where babies and young kids will be reunited with their families.
I see a world of deep, heartful human connection and caring for each other.
I see a world with talent shows on street corners and joyful skipping around and hugs and high fives and secret handshakes in the streets.
I see an America that can set aside some of its anger and can meet for healing discussions again.
I see a world without violence.
I see a world where art is prioritized. And funded.
See a world where all basic needs are met, where our water is always clean, where we don't have to carry the constant fear of death with us into every day, but can live each day fulfilling our full nature.
On this day, we consider the possibility of infinite possibility. On this day, we consider that love is stronger than fear. Like life, like light that casts out darkness, love shall cast out fear. And we imagine an America that has returned to its best, to its center, to its aspiration for moral good, that has taken a fearless moral inventory, that has looked deeply at where we are not who we say we are, that has reconciled, that has repaired, that has restored, that has atoned, that has made amends, that has made reparation, that has claimed moral leadership, which once again is a shining light of infinite possibility. Not that we have ever actualized it, but lo, let us begin again to try. May our hearts once again be ablaze with the possibilities of a society in which all men and all women and all beings might thrive. Let us be infused. Let us open our hearts and embrace this possibility and recognize the extraordinary fact that we are citizens of such a system as this. To give gratitude for the rights and own the responsibilities that we in our time shall foster this, shall protect this, shall nurture this, shall take a stand for this, shall draw a line for this, shall set boundaries for this. And yes, if need be, sacrifice for this. For in this way, our lives are given meaning, and we claim dignity for ourselves and others. We place in God's hands our precious world. We place in God's hands our country or our countries. In the name of all the great religious and spiritual figures of all the avatars. And yes, on this day, remembering Jesus in his resurrection, one of the doors through which humanity has walked. May all humanity walk into the love at the center of our own true being. And thus may all be lifted in this country and in our precious world. And so it is. we say, amen. When two or more are gathered, and I want to thank you for joining with me and considering the ideas and the possibilities that we considered today. And I want to thank all of you who are on live stream joined with us as well. What an extraordinary thing this is, that we can be part of a resonant field of higher thought, higher consciousness, higher possibility, not only with those joined with us in a physical room, but even in virtual space, no matter where you are. Let our holidays not be mindless, let our holidays be mindful. And with that, I wish you truly, from the deepest part of my being, a joyous Easter Sunday. Thank you. Bye, everybody.